This is an Adeptus Astartes Gladiator battle tank from the twisted mind of Archimagos Dominus Belisarius Call, one of the new Primaris floaty tanks for the Space Marines. Gotta be honest, I was a little bit of a poo-pooer on the floaty tanks, but this thing has been sitting on my desk for quite a while waiting for paint, and it's starting to grow on me. Also, it's been waiting for paint, and that brings up another question. How do you make a metal box look good with paint? I feel like Space Marine vehicles in general are an uphill battle, but this thing is a flying brick, and I can't even fall back on color because I play Black Templars. It's in the name, black, the absence of color. I have been thinking about how on earth to make this look really, really cool, and I have yet to come up with any good solutions. But the time has come to paint this guy, so I gotta figure it out. In an effort to make my Gladiator Lancer extra special, I have done a little bit of kit bashing and converting. I bought a copy of the Space Marine sticking out of the top man in the turret weapon from the Repulsor kit on eBay. Having this on my Gladiators and not on my Impulsor goes a long way to making them feel different and more main battle tanky, instead of I can't believe it's not a Rhino. And I used some bits from the Black Templar upgrade frame to decorate the business end of the tank. Step 1 is snapping this bad boy off the base and doing some last minute cleaning and prepping. I used some Tamiya plastic putty to fill in the seams in the kit, and I cut off all the extra decorations that come with the Gladiator. Some of the smaller details have hard to scrape mold lines, like in between these little ridges. The best way I've found to solve this is to apply soft pressure and scrape them with a hobby knife, and then run the brush of my plastic glue applicator over these until the mold lines completely disappear. These bits fill up a lot of the empty space around the tank and help to differentiate it from the Impulsor. One idea I have for how to make this tank look a little extra special is to add some scratch-built armor, and to do that, I want to use this chopper that I got not that long ago. I was really drawn to its simplicity, but I think that simplicity, it could use a little bit more complexity because I am not at all happy with this, but maybe I can get some use out of it. The big problem with this design is how poorly it holds onto the razor blades. It pinches them and lets them flex and wobble a lot. I drew out on paper what I want the armor to look like and then used this as a guide to help me make these cuts. I took some plastic card and got to chopping, setting my fence so I can get some repeat cuts. The blade was not sharp enough to whack all the way through the big pieces, but it did gouge it enough that I could break it. And it did a good job of nipping these pieces once I got them cut to smaller sizes. I laid out my pattern and got to work cleaning it all up. I sanded the edges of each square just a little with my nail file, and then for the rivets. I made dents with the point of my hobby knife and then opened these up more with a 1mm drill bit, making a dimple in preparation for some scale rivets. For these rivets, I'm using some nail micro art beads. Dipping a toothpick into Elmer's glue makes the tip sticky enough to pick up one bead that I can dip into super glue and then press it into place. This is a very simple technique, but tedious. After I got the rivets on there, I transferred my armor plates onto a sheet of thin plastic card and glued them down with plastic glue, rebuilding my original template. Then I cut it out and added some battle damage. I drilled some holes with the projectiles made it all the way through the armor, and then a bunch of small dents for impacts that were successfully deflected. A fantastic trick for making realistic impact craters is filling these dents with plastic putty and then using the round back of a paintbrush to squish it out, to represent the armor that was displaced by the impact. I bent my new armor into shape and then tried to figure out how to attach these. I discovered that coffee stir sticks are just about the right height and cuttable in my craft cutter. I super glued these into place and it worked really well. I started making more and more, adding these all over the vehicle. Overall, the cutter worked out fine. It's not very accurate, but it is consistent. I think I might try and rebuild the guillotine arm of my cutter to get it working much more precisely. And speaking of upgrading, the next upgrade I want to make to my Gladiator is making a tool rack. I wanted some more storytelling on my tank, so I cut off the bracket and sanded these smooth. Then I took some textured plastic card and cut a length to act as my shelf, gluing it on top of the engine. Don't tell Oshu, but I think this is covering part of the exhaust. I'm sure this won't cause a problem. I want to fill this with extra equipment, like the Iron Hail Heavy Stubber that came with the kit. Because I'm a Black Templars player and we're better than everyone else, we get to swap this for a multi-melta, but now my kit is truly WYSIWYG no matter what weapon I go with. To make my railing, I took some brass rod and bent it with my round pliers, drilling holes into the side of my tank and then sticking it in. Then I put on all the purity seals I own onto the Gladiator. The extra armor helps a lot with this. Purity seals don't like to sit flush, they like to hang, and they could hang off of the proud armor. Now my Gladiator has a lot more going on than its protogenitor, the Impulsor. I think the extra armor helps a ton. It leans into kind of the 30K tactical style of the new Primaris vehicles, which is kind of what I didn't like about them. It kind of got away from like the grim gothic flair of the old Space Marine vehicles. Although arguably the old Rhino and Land Raider didn't have a lot of grim gothicness to them, they were just the classic old metal boxes. And I'm kind of picturing in my head like the 10 years of freehanding and Aquillas and purity seals I remember seeing on those kits, more than what they actually were. I think the extra armor also does a really good job of differentiating the Gladiator versus the regular old Impulsor. In 40k, machines have souls, they have machine spirits. And so if a machine spirit can show off that it's really good at shooting and really good at staying alive as an impulsor, it gets retrofitted and upgraded to be a Gladiator battle tank. Now that I get this guy all assembled, I just gotta figure out how to paint it. I took everything that was not nailed down and put it onto my little cubes of wood with double stick tape for sub-assemblies. I don't usually like sub-assemblies, but for a vehicle like this, it's a must. I primed everything in black, the first step of Black Templars, and now to start making some decisions. Now over the course of 10 years, I have refined my Black Templar painting recipe to a razor's edge. However, this really only works on infantry, and I don't paint a lot of vehicles. So to paint up this Gladiator tank, I'm gonna have to get creative and reach for some stuff in my toolbox that I don't often use. And luckily, today's sponsor, Cobalt Keep, can help with that. Cobalt Keep makes high-quality hobby accessories like magnetic bases and paint handles, and they have changed the game again with the Cobalt Keep hobby rack system. These racks are made of high-quality plastic and come with 5 slot holders for dropper bottles, 4 slot holders for pots and chonky bottles, and boxes for holding everything else. These attractive racks feature clear fronts so you can easily see your paint and are made of sturdy ABS plastic and can be assembled in minutes. And the most exciting feature is the magnetic customization. Each shelf is secured with sturdy magnets, making them quick to swap in and out, allowing you to customize your racks with ease. Quickly swap around paint and colors shelf by shelf. I made my rack setup so I can grab all the paints I need by color or recipe, taking them out of the rack so I can have them in front of me and swapping them back into the shelf to get something else. I use a lot of different brands of different shapes and sizes, and it's great to be able to have them all sitting neat and tidy in the same spot. Cobalt Keep is committed to making the highest quality hobby products, and if you want to give the Cobalt Keep hobby rack system a try for yourself, you can shop with the code COBALT10 to get 10% off all rack items. To get my tanks the right shade of black, I sprayed a black paint over my black prime. The primer is ultra matte, which looks very gray in person, so this more satin black will look a lot darker. Then I threw a white zenithal over the gunner, weapons, equipment, and hover plates. Now, to get my Templars color that the comment section always roasts me for, I make my Templars a bit blue-black. This saturated blue color makes the models look better to me, and to recreate this, I mixed some desaturated blue into black paint and I zenithaled this over the tank. Then I mixed in just a little bit more blue and did another round of zenithaling. Then I mixed this color onto my palette just a little bit brighter and sponged this all over the tank. I put my Black Templars contrast paint mix into my airbrush and dusted this over the tank to blend all my layers together and darken them just a little bit. Now I have to actually reach for a paintbrush. I painted a creamy white color over the front panel. I wish I could have airbrushed this, but it's in such an awkward spot that there's really no other way than 100 layers with a brush. I put some tan and brown paint onto my palette and started yuckying up the panel, glazing these dirty colors into the corners, slopping it on, and then coming back in with a clean paintbrush and feathering it out. I layered this on little by little until I was happy with the level of grime. Like these tanks have been driving through the desert for a few hundred years. I used Wildwood contrast paint, which is a color I used to glaze over my Templars shoulder pads to further tint and dirty up the panel. Continuing with the cream details, I loaded up some decals. I finally get to use these big decals I have. I stacked a few on top of one another to build a Templar shrine on the sides of my tank, filling in the open space with scribble text. These are the vows taken by this tank's crew to crusade especially hard. I sprayed matte varnish over these decals with my airbrush and then used my brown and tan paints to tint these to match the front armor, sponging a little black over top for paint chips and using a sharp brush to add some micro scratches. And I used these same colors for the side spawns and weapons, making sure they were a matching complexion of dirt. Now that I have all the cream colors done, I moved on to red. I painted this over all the extra armor panels, starting with the dark red, and highlighting with a light red, doing the same brush on and wipe off I did for the cream colors. I sponged on some bright red to make the armor look battle hardened and finished it off with a red wash. Vehicles have never been much of a thing in my Black Templar army. I much prefer to crusade, bringing righteous justice to the enemies of mankind with chainswords. However, recently, in an attempt to actually win games, I have been bringing 2 Gladiator Lancers. And the reason for that is I make them do all of the boring stuff. They typically stay in my deployment zone, screening out enemy deep strikers and taking shots at enemy vehicles that can cause a problem for my squishier infantry. And they can super duper do that with the Lancer Laser Destroyer's 72-inch range, which is hilariously 12 inches more than a 40k game board. So if they can see an opponent, they can shoot it. And speaking of shooting, the Lancer Laser Destroyer is pretty darn good at 2 shots hitting on 3s, or 2s if it doesn't move because of heavy, strength 14, AP -4, damage D6 +3. So whatever it shoots at, it has a pretty darn good chance of blowing it up, especially because of Aquilon optics. This tank, every single turn, can reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, and 1 damage roll, which means that there's like a 50 50 chance of each dice actually wounding the target. In my experience, it does not feel like 50-50, but it's the best shot I've got. And speaking of shots, I gotta paint up the guns. All my weapons are zenithaled, and I did another dry brushing of white to highlight all of the edges in preparation for a wash. I threw Rattling Grime contrast paint over the weapons. This color, in my opinion, is the perfect oily weapon color. And for all the metal bits on the tank, I thinned down my Black Templar contrast mix and slopped this over, letting my zenithal shine through. Now, the finishing touch of this is a light dry brushing of silver paint. This catches on the raised areas and adds a little bit of glitter, while letting the bulk of the value, highlights and shadows be achieved with normal opaque paints. It gives me much more control over the final result, compared to normal metallics plus a wash. I painted the accessories in a similar manner, base coating them with a speed paint and then finishing them off with some highlights using similar opaque paints and dark washes. Now, for the character of this vehicle, the Sticky Outy Gunner. Space Marine vehicles are operated by tech marines, battle brothers who spent a couple decades studying on Mars and the ways of the machine. I base coated his red armor with a dark red over everything, a red wash, and then highlights with 2 rounds of red in bright red paint. I edge highlighted his armor with orange and then got to work on his shoulder pads, using some tan and brown contrast paint and then some Templar decals. Having taken a little break from the tank, I can see a few things now that could use some sprucing, like adding a little extra red to the armor with a red dry brush. After that, I did a dry brushing of dark gray over everything to edge highlight. Then I took a lot of silver paint and sponged everywhere, finishing it off with a dry brushing of silver. This sells the tank as a painted metal object and I can finally start assembling. I super glued everything into place and finally got to see what this bad boy looks like all together. And you might have noticed that my Lancer laser destroyer looks different, and that is because I made it myself. I didn't feel like the original looked much like a las cannon, so I whipped this one up on my computer. And if you also like what it looks like, the STL is free on EonsOfBattle.com. EonsOfBattle.com is the place to find our merch like the new Nick and Jay dice, and the best way to support us doing what we do with a membership. Each month, members will get a credit that they can use on our new monthly terrain pack or any previous pack we have ever made. For the month of October, we have expanded our Orc terrain with the Orc Rocket Factory. Fill your game boards with ramshackle walls and a grizzly gate with an explosive flare. Man the battlements of an Orc weapons workshop absolutely dripping with bombs, rockets, and pointy missiles. This modular terrain is fully compatible with our previous Orc brewery and the Octeris terrain and can be assembled in all sorts of shapes ready to detonate at a moment's notice. It feels so good to have this tank so close to being done. It has taken so long and involved so much procrastinating. I remember I started putting this tank together on Christmas Eve. I was visiting my family and after they all went to bed, I got bored and so I started putting together a Gladiator tank and it has taken until now to get it here and it is so close. Now that I've got it all together, I think the next step is gonna be weathering, but to be able to do that weathering, I gotta get it on a base. My Templar bases are incredibly simple, Vallejo Earth and Pro Acryl Olive Flesh. I airbrushed the earth over the base, really watered down so the black prime and zenithal shows through, and then dry brushed on the olive flesh to bring out the details in the sand and wood chips. To attach my Lancer to the base, I used 2-part epoxy, and I have waited so long to build these models that I lost the little clear puck flying stands that they came with. So for my tanks, I'm using a chunk of broomstick handle. It gets the job done. Now that my floaty tank is actually floating, I airbrushed some Vallejo earth along the bottom third of the model where the gravity-defying tech is kicking up dust. And I drip more watery earth into some of the cracks and on the vents of the tank. Finally, at long last, I painted the rim of the base black. The Gladiator Lancer is the first Primaris vehicle I am adding to my Black Templars crusade, but it certainly will not be the last. I've got 2 Impulsors, 1 more Gladiator battle tank, and a Repulsor Executioner. And I kinda do want to add another Land Raider Crusader to my force because 2 Land Raider Crusaders can fit comfortably in under 500 points to my Space Marine lists. In terms of painting vehicles, it still doesn't flim-flams, it doesn't jimmy-jams, but that's just experience. I have painted hundreds and hundreds of infantry models this year, only a couple of vehicles, and only this one Primaris vehicle. And the Primaris vehicles, they're definitely growing on me a lot. I have been committing the wargaming sin of playing with these models unpainted, and they've definitely grown on me a ton. I need to add a bunch more to my collection, and let me know in the comments below what Space Marine vehicle should I work on next. Please say Land Raider. A big thanks to Cobalt Keep for sponsoring this video, and as always, thanks for watching.